Good morning. This is Dan Duchan with Cochise County, and we're going to get started with our third class here with our budget webinars. I do have Dr. Hammond from the University of Arizona on. So Dr. Hammond, if you could go ahead and unmute your microphone. I had to mute you for a second, and then share your slides, and then we'll get started.
Okay, Dan, can you see my slides?
Yeah, Dr. Hammond, you're up. So today we've got a special guest, Dr. Hammond from the University of Arizona and the Economic and Business Research Center. And I've been following his work pretty closely. He does a lot of economic research up in Tucson and the state. And he works with the Joint Legislative Budget Committee as well, which we talked to Stefan last week. So we're really excited to get his take on some economic factors that we're watching right now with relation to the COVID stay-home orders and everything we've been talking about with revenues. So Dr. Hammond, you're live. We can hear you, and I got your slideshow. So if you want to take over and go for it, it's all yours. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Dan. It's great to be here. Great to see all of you. I hope you're all staying well. So let's go ahead and jump in and talk about the key topics today. So the first thing I think to keep in mind and front of mind these days is that uncertainty really dominates the outlook. There's still a lot that we don't know about the virus itself and how it spreads and how we can best respond to it. So there's still a lot of things that we don't know right now. For instance, we're not sure if there will be a resurgence in the outbreak or not. We are seeing cases across Arizona rising at a bit faster pace these days. And the uncertainty about the outbreak and the virus itself creates uncertainty about the economic outlook. So we don't know how long the downturn will last. We do know that we are in the midst of a major drop in economic activity, but we're not sure how long it will last. And that means that we don't know when the recovery will begin or how strong the recovery will be once it starts. So one of the most important things to keep in mind right now is that there's a lot of uncertainty as we look into the future. But certainly for me and forecasters and people who are thinking about revenues at all levels of government these days, we have to think about the future and make projections. But certainly as we think about my forecast and really the forecasts of any economist worldwide, there are very large error bands surrounding those forecasts at the moment. So just keep that in mind. Projections will be evolving as we go forward. One of the things that we do know is that the Arizona economy was strong before the outbreak. So we were seeing, strong job growth around the state of Arizona. Tucson, in fact, had really the strongest job growth that we'd seen in more than a decade last year. But that's, seems like a million years ago at this point, and the Arizona economy is now suffering a major downturn, as is the nation and the globe, really. We're seeing huge job losses. Those will eventually spread to all sectors. Initially, the job losses are going to be confined to these hardest hit sectors where people tend to gather together closely. So travel and tourism, healthcare, retail trade, other sectors affected by the stay-at-home orders and just by the reluctance of ordinary individuals to be in close contact with other people. So we have seen the federal monetary and fiscal authorities take some pretty strong action thus far, and that will help and is helping. But you want to keep in mind that it's not going to eliminate the downturn. We are going to go through a significant contraction, even with the significant moves that we've seen so far. And if there are additional moves, those will help, but they're not going to make this go away. So as in terms of the outlook, as I see it now, I think we're going to see a gradual return to growth in Arizona and nationally over the next quarter or so. But you want to keep in mind that the outbreak is going to drive the recovery. So if we see a significant increase in the outbreak here in Arizona, and so far Arizona has been not particularly hard hit by the virus. If that changes, that's going to affect how people act and what they decide to do. It will affect their consumption decisions, whether or not they're going back to restaurants, bars, hotels, motels, traveling, and may even affect how they feel about going back into healthcare situations and in retail situations. And it will also make it harder for employers to get back to normal. And of course, as we think about the counties along the southern border, that will impact the speed with which the border will open up again. And I'll show you a couple of slides from our Arizona-Mexico economic indicator site about what we can see so far in the hard data on how Arizona-Mexico trade is playing out. So let's do the good news first, right? The state economy was in good shape before the outbreak began in 2019. Arizona was adding jobs at roughly double the national pace, Phoenix growing even faster. Even Tucson was beating the national average last year. And as I said, Tucson's job growth was the fastest we'd seen in more than a decade last year. The Sierra Vista Douglas metro area, which is Cochise County, there we saw pretty strong job growth there. The county was very slow to recover from the Great Recession and generate growth, but during the past couple of years, we're seeing positive job growth in the Sierra Vista Douglas metro area. So that's the good news, but there's no doubt that the economies nationwide have suffered a huge shock to the system. And where we first saw that statewide was in the weekly initial claims for unemployment insurance. And you can track this weekly data on our Arizona's Economy website. That's just azeconomy.org. So azeconomy, all one word, .org. And what you see here is that regular initial claims for unemployment insurance spiked up to over 130,000 in early April, and since then they've been trending back down, currently in the neighborhood of 20 to 25,000. And we do see some data now emerging for the expansion of unemployment insurance benefits connected to the CARES Act. And these are called pandemic unemployment assistance claims. So these are initial claims you'll see here starting in mid-May for that pandemic assistance. What those claims reflect are claims by individuals who in prior downturns were not eligible for unemployment insurance. So that includes contract employees, so-called gig workers in many cases, as well as the self-employed. The state stood up a new system to administrate these claims. That system began to report claims in the middle of May. The Department of Employment Security believes that they had about 166,000 claims by the self-employed gig workers and others that are reflected in those initial claims prior to the new system coming on board. But with the new system, we can now separate those out each week. You also want to keep in mind that these that initial or that unemployment insurance benefits have significantly increased in dollar value. Prior to the CARES Act, the benefits paid $240 a week as a maximum. The CARES Act adds $600 per week to that through the end of July. So that's a huge increase in the generosity of these unemployment insurance benefits. That will have some impact on the recovery in the near term. Some employees will just make more by claiming unemployment than they will by going back to work. And for some of them, that trade-off will make sense. For others, they will see that these expanded benefits end at the end of July, at least under current law, and will also see that those benefits may not cover the health care and other fringe benefits that would be available in terms of returning to work. So we'll see how all that plays out. But you do want to keep in mind that these expanded benefits represent a pretty significant infusion of income into the state of Arizona. Those benefits are estimated by the Department of Employment Security to have totaled $2.6 billion since March 28th. And that's roughly $2.6 billion of new money flowing into the state economy over and above what we would have seen had the outbreak not happened. These benefits will most likely be spent by people who are unemployed. They'll use it to support rent, to buy groceries, and some goods that are taxable under the transactions privilege tax here in Arizona. These benefits are also subject to income tax, and that will also be reflected in state revenues going forward. So that's a little bit about where we saw the first impacts. We're now getting the data from our normal surveillance system. So this is the unemployment insurance data, or the unemployment data from the employment situation report. We have a little bit more data for the nation. This is the way it always works. We get the national data a couple weeks before we get the state data. The national data, you can see the huge spike in the national unemployment rate and in the state unemployment rate in March to levels that are the highest that we've seen since the Great Depression of the 1929 to 33 period, much higher than anything during the post-war years. That's true for Arizona as well, although the data that we have only goes back to 1976. And we do see that the national unemployment rate fell a little bit in May. I think we'll see something similar here in Arizona, and what that reflects is the gradual reopening of the economy across many states in the nation. Now, there's some controversy now about what the unemployment rate is actually telling us. This is happening for completely legitimate reasons. The Bureau of Labor Statistics has been talking about this since before March data came out, because just the characteristics of the pandemic create some issues in terms of classifying individuals as employed or unemployed. And what's happening is that a lot of people are choosing to report themselves as employed but temporarily away from work. That's not actually how BLS wants those individuals to be classified. An individual who's separated from work, say furloughed temporarily from their job, should be reported as unemployed, but a lot of people are reporting themselves as employed but temporarily away from the job. That's a classification that's normally used for people who are temporarily ill or on vacation. It's not designed to capture what's happening with the pandemic. But nonetheless, that is happening. If we account for this self-misclassification, that would drive the U.S. unemployment rate up to in the neighborhood of 19 or 20% in April, and by about 3 percentage points or up to 16% in May. So either way, well, we get a modest decline in the U.S. unemployment rate, still the highest that we've seen since the Great Depression. Broader measures of unemployment are higher. The U6 measure includes those who are marginally attached, so people who are discouraged or for whatever reason aren't actively seeking employment, including because they're worried about going out. That unemployment rate is higher, but even there, that came down in May compared to April. So there's another system that we use to track employment. This is the survey of establishments. And this data, we typically refer to this as jobs. And I wanted to give you a sense of where the employment impacts have been most severe across the nation. So this is the total percent change from February to April across the nation. And we're looking at seasonally adjusted data. So this percent change is not annualized. There's nothing we've done other than just calculate the straight percent change. For the U.S., on average, jobs have fallen by 14.5%. You'll notice that the states that are shaded darker have the larger percent changes. States that are shaded lighter have the smaller percent change. The darkest shaded states are in the Northeast, the Midwest, particularly Michigan. Michigan actually has the largest percentage loss during this period. Nevada as well, reflecting the importance of the leisure and tourism industry there. Arizona is in the group of states that have somewhat smaller impacts, although they're really huge across the board. But within that, with that said, Arizona's impacts has been a little bit lighter than many states at 10.4% jobs lost in 2 months. Most of these states either have had less of an impact from the outbreak or a less prevalent outbreak, or they've actually not instituted stay-at-home orders. So overall, Arizona has come through comparatively well so far. But again, how this pans out will depend in part on how the outbreak progresses going forward. So this is another way of thinking about this, and I put together the data for all metropolitan areas in Arizona compared to the US. These are over the year percent changes in jobs. So these percent changes are a little bit smaller than on the previous map, and that's because we're looking at last year. So when you have trending data and you look at an over the year impact of something that happened just in the last couple of months, you're going to get a smaller percent change. But the relative magnitudes still hold up. Tucson jobs are down 8.6% over the year in April. Sierra Vista Douglas down 2.1%. Flagstaff hit the hardest because of the importance of the tourism sector up there. Leisure and hospitality is a very large share of the employment mix there, and that's where a huge chunk of the job losses are, as we'll see. So let's break this out by industry. Here's over the year job change for Arizona. You'll notice the biggest job losses are in leisure and hospitality, so that's hotels, motels, restaurants, and bars. It also includes gyms, other types of recreation, as well as arts and entertainment. So movie theater employees would be classified there as well. Transportation and trade, transportation, utilities gets hit pretty hard. That reflects, it's primarily in retail trade where those job losses have been. With the exception of just a couple of trade sectors like food and beverage, as you might expect. So grocery stores have actually been adding employees in many cases, as well as other general merchandise, which is kind of where you would find Walmart, Target, other big general merchandisers that have stayed open. Professional and business services has been hit. What's driving that statewide is really the employment services. So think of temporary help or contract employees. This, anytime the economy turns down, we see big job losses in that sector very early on. One of the big surprises in the downturn was what happened to education and health services. Most of the job losses are in healthcare. And that reflects the restrictions of activities at dentist offices. They were only allowed to do kind of emergency procedures because it's so easy to spread the virus in that environment. Many doctors' offices have opted to lay off employees and to conduct whatever they need to do via telemedicine. Hospitals have also experienced significant layoffs as they were not allowed for a big chunk of April to do any elective procedures or surgeries. And, you know, part of the thinking there was that we didn't know in March how bad the outbreak was going to get. So we wanted to make sure that hospitals had the capacity available to treat large numbers of COVID patients. And in several communities around the state, many of them around the state, that didn't transpire, and hospitals were forced instead to lay a lot of people off. Other services, that's where you find nail and hair salons, child care, that kind of thing goes there. So we saw some job losses there as well. Most of the other sectors are kind of where they were over the year. I put together the latest data for the Sierra Vista Douglas metro area, and you can see some of the biggest job losses again are in leisure and hospitality. education, health services as well, smaller losses in other services. Kind of the outlier here is some of the gains over the year in professional and business services. That might reflect the perhaps in Cochise County, those services might be more professional in nature, with people more able to work at home, and in addition, those professional services might be connected to the importance of the government sector in Cochise County, which has somewhat more stable demand than we would see in other professional and business services sectors around the remaining parts of the state. So one of the key indicators going forward here is going to be consumer spending, and consumer spending is really hard to get a handle on. We often track that by taxable sales, but not everything that consumers buy is taxable. And in particular, it's been tough to come up with high frequency data that will help us track the pandemic. More of this data is becoming available. This particular data comes from a group called Opportunity Insights out of Harvard. They have a nice website called tracktherecovery.org, so it's all one word. And they are tracking this credit card data. This particular data set comes from Affinity Solutions, and it's card-based transactions, so that would include both credit and debit cards. You're seeing similar data come out of the JP Morgan Chase Institute, so you can just Google that. They're talking about their credit card data. MasterCard just did a report on their data. Most of it doesn't break down to the local level like this Harvard group is doing. So this shows you the percent change from early January. So this is seasonally adjusted data, and it's all expressed relative to that early January period. And what we see for all the card-based transactions that they track, and they don't track everything even within the card-based transactions, we have seen gradual improvement from the kind of 30% drop relative to January, about the middle of April. Since then, we've seen gradual recovery. We're down about 12% to 15% here in Arizona. So what do they track? One of the things that they do track is information about spending at restaurants and hotels. So notice that we get the same kind of drop off, but a slower recovery. The spending at restaurants and hotels, at least in Tucson and Phoenix, still 40 to 50% below where we were in early January. Now they also track other things that you can explore. So they'll track spending on healthcare. That's rebounded pretty significantly. In fact, healthcare spending in Phoenix and Tucson was actually above where it was in January. So as expected, that's a sector that's rebounded fairly rapidly. They'll also track grocery spending, and of course that explodes at the same time that restaurant and hotel spending is crashing. They also do transportation, so gas purchases, airline ticket purchases would be included there, apparel and general merchandise spending, and a couple of other categories. So you can explore that. These are live graphs. They update about every couple of weeks with the latest daily data. So what's been going on with the border? I put together some data on these border crossings. So these are legal northbound border crossings. And this data comes out of the Arizona-Mexico Economic Indicator site that my center runs. You can see the link there at the bottom of the slide. It's azmex.eller.arizona.edu. We're just getting the data. We got data from March, and even though the closure of the border to non-essential travel only happened in the kind of last couple weeks of March, already had a big impact on the legal northbound crossings through our border ports of entry, particularly including through Douglas. Across all our borders, they're down about a third from where they were last year. So, a significant impact on those border crossings. As we know from some research that was done years ago here in the center, those border crossings frequently are Mexican visitors that are crossing the border to work in some cases and to spend in border communities and further north in the state as well. So already a big impact in March. We'll probably see something at least as big or even bigger once the April data comes out. I also put the data together on the trade flows. So these are the value of goods that are flowing through or being traded through the Douglas border port of entry. So this includes both the sum of exports and imports, just to give you an idea of what's happening on this kind of two-way flow. If you visit the website, you can split that out to exports versus imports, but here I've combined them. And now we do have the April data for this particular indicator, and you can see the massive drop in the value of goods passing through the Douglas border port of entry. They are down for all products 16% over the year. For electric and electronic manufacturing products, they're down 50%. Manufacturing, machinery and equipment, is down almost 60% as well. So big impact on trade from the outbreak in April. Let's talk a little bit about the outlook, and the forecast that I do cover Arizona as a whole and then the Phoenix and Tucson metro areas. So what we're looking at for the state are these huge job, income, and sales declines in the baseline forecast. So the baseline is the most likely scenario. And the declines at this point are expected to be similar in magnitude to what we went through during 2008, 2009, but it all happens in a much more compressed time period under the baseline. So we get these peak to trough job losses of about 11%, and that essentially happens in one quarter, the second quarter. That translates into about 386,000 jobs lost statewide. So what happens with unemployment? The unemployment rate is already up significantly, nearly 13%. The forecast calls for that to rise again in the third quarter. We know we're going to get a big increase in the second, but typically what happens with the unemployment rate is it keeps rising even though jobs start to grow again. I think we'll see something similar here. Overall population growth for most of the state, I don't think there's going to be much impact. The impact that I think we'll see will be in the second quarter, but I think assuming the outbreak doesn't get worse, that we're gonna see people start to move back to Arizona from other states, much like they were doing prior to the outbreak. And that means that housing activity should continue on at pretty much the level we saw last year going forward. So the recovery, I think the recovery is going to begin fairly rapidly. Again, assuming the outbreak's under control, that'll start to begin in the third quarter, and then we'll gradually return to our pre-outbreak level of activity, which is the benchmark there is the first quarter of 2020. We should get back to that in early 2022. So the way we think about the forecast is in terms of probabilities, and the baseline is always assumed to have the highest probability of transpiring, and that is currently assigned a 45% probability. But when things are very uncertain as they are now, the pessimistic alternative typically gets elevated in terms of its probability, and right now the pessimistic scenario has a 35% probability, and that's almost as high as the baseline. I'll show you what the pessimistic scenario looks like in just a moment. But the baseline and the pessimistic scenarios have the highest probabilities. The optimistic scenario, as we'll see in a moment, gets the remaining 20% of probability. So here's what those alternative scenarios look like. And most of the uncertainty at this point is not so much about how bad the outbreak will be. Again, assuming that we have control of it, in all three scenarios, we get about the same drop in the second quarter. The optimistic scenario generates faster growth in the near term when we get back to our pre-outbreak level of economic activity at about the middle of 2021. The baseline does that in early 2022, and the pessimistic alternative takes longer to get back. It's the first quarter of 2024 before we're back to our pre-outbreak level of economic activity. But remember, all those scenarios assume that we pretty much have control over the outbreak, or at least it doesn't get much worse going forward. So what are the times to recovery across various sectors? Well, one way to look at that is to look at annual data and to take 2019 as the pre-outbreak or the prior peak, and then look at where we get back to in terms of 2022. So employment and education and health services, statewide, it gets hit pretty hard, but then it rebounds rapidly. It's likely that, healthcare is something that has enduring demand. People are not going to want to put off the elective surgeries very long because pretty soon they become not elective anymore. In addition, the healthcare sector is likely to do the best job of convincing us that it's safe to go back into those environments. They're going to have the best precautions, and they'll do the best job of convincing us about those precautions. So education and health gets back above the 2019 level rapidly. Trade, transportation, and utilities also fairly rapidly rebounds. I think people feel more comfortable in those environments sooner. Professional and business services, that rebounds as well. Construction, finance all do pretty well. The industries over on the left are those that are going to struggle the most, and the poster child here is going to be leisure and hospitality. So travel and tourism is going to be the slowest to rebound from this. Information is kind of an interesting sector. It includes some high-tech activity like website designers. Those jobs will rebound rapidly if they ever fell. But this information sector also includes newspapers, television stations, radio, and those have been hit by the decline in ad revenues. And it may take a while for those jobs to come back if they do. So there are going to be some sectors that rebound fairly rapidly, and there will be some sectors that are going to take longer to get back to normal. So what are some of the key takeaways here? The first takeaway is that we're still in a very uncertain environment looking forward. There may be significant changes to the outlook. My own forecasts have gyrated fairly significantly just month to month, and that's going to continue, both because of new data that's coming out telling us about the severity of the impact and the scale of the recovery, and as we get new information about how the outbreak is progressing around the state and around the nation and even around the world. So in terms of what I'll be doing one more monthly forecast in June if things go well, and then I'll be back on a regular long run forecast cycle, which is quarterly, starting in July and August. And there are versions, brief summaries of the outlook that are available at azeconomy.org for Arizona, Phoenix, and Tucson, and you can track what's going on there. So the Arizona economy was strong before the outbreak. We need to keep that in mind. The state economy, this is not like 2008, 2009, where Arizona was the epicenter of the housing bust. This is not that same kind of downturn. If the outbreak does not get particularly bad here in Arizona, we've got a good chance to return to growth and grow faster than the states that are hard hit by the outbreak. But no doubt we're suffering a major downturn. Growth will return. The travel and tourism sectors are going to be slower to recover than some of the other sectors. And one thing to keep in mind is that, consumer and worker perceptions of risk are going to matter a lot here. So if consumers don't feel comfortable going back into into restaurants and bars, hotels and motels, they don't travel, they're not going back, to the gym, they're not doing the same kind of things, they're not shopping as much as they were before, then all this is going to take longer. In addition, as employers try to sort of reopen, making employees feel safe going back into the environment will be key to getting them back on track. So there's a lot of work to do here in terms of communicating to both consumers and to workers how best to keep themselves safe. As we learn more about the outbreak and the virus and exactly how it's transmitted and how transmissible it is in various circumstances, we'll know a lot more about how we can protect ourselves, particularly vulnerable populations, and everybody will start to feel more comfortable going out and doing things once we have a better handle on what are the risky situations and what are the not so risky situations that we don't need to worry about. So information, as always, is going to be key here, and communicating that effectively to the right groups will matter a lot. So we've already seen significant action by the monetary and fiscal authorities. I don't know if we're going to see much more fiscal help or what that help will look like. There's a lot of pushback on the generosity of the unemployment insurance benefits at this point, so we don't know whether or not those and under what circumstances they might be extended. At least my view is that whatever we do in terms of federal fiscal policy needs to be fairly carefully targeted, probably on healthcare and public health. So contact tracing and those sorts of things will be important. Development of vaccines and therapeutics will also matter a lot here. The sooner that we have therapeutics that are effective and vaccines, the sooner people will go back to doing and acting the way they were before. So with that, I will conclude my my presentation, and I will stop my screen share there, Dan.
Great info. Thank you. Let me get that one. All right, I appreciate it. This is amazing information. Let me adjust my volume here. I did have a couple of questions though. Sorry, I will read here. What about with Huachuca and Cochise County? We've heard anecdotally that the recession was lagged here. For example, in 2008, 2009, we didn't feel it until 2 or 3 years later. Do you have anything? Could you corroborate that, or do you have any thoughts on that?
When you have local economies that really have a large share of federal government activity, and Tucson's in the same boat. That federal government activity is sort of a double-edged sword. It does help when you have, it does help to buffer the local economy somewhat, because federal government activity typically isn't very responsive to business cycle ups and downs. So economies that have a big federal share, they don't tend to grow as fast as economies with lower shares, and they don't tend to go down in recessions as fast, and sometimes not as much as economies that have those lower shares. So think about it as sort of a stabilizer. It doesn't tend to respond very much to these ups and downs. It's unlikely that we'll see, the military presence affected by the outbreak, but I'm no expert on that. But it seems a bit unlikely just based on the little that I do know. Keep that in mind. The other side of the coin, or the other edge of the sword, is that having a big federal presence, as Tucson and Cochise County do, when there are funding changes that impact the federal presence, that can have a disproportionately large impact on local economies that have a big presence in federal activity. So we think that the impact of the federal sequester and other budget cuts that happened in 2012 and 2013 had a bigger impact on Tucson and perhaps even Cochise County than we saw elsewhere, and that definitely delayed and slowed Tucson's recovery from the Great Recession. That looks like that spending, at least statewide, has rebounded back to those levels that we saw in 2012, and at least I haven't heard much about federal budget cuts being bandied about these days, but it's something that we'll want to keep an eye on going forward.
Okay, great info. I do have one more question. Well, two. While you're here, property tax. We're always talking about sales tax and unemployment, and we understand property tax. It's valued once a year, and it's has a more long-term cycle. Do you have any thoughts about changes in collection rates or possible government action about penalties and fines and that type of thing?
I'm not hearing anything about government action on that score, but as individuals find their income greatly reduced because of job loss and other shocks, that's going to impact tax revenues across the board. So I'd certainly be wanting to keep an eye on that and track as well as possible what's happening with employment. We don't have a lot of high frequency data or very much or any that I know of. So this is kind of an exercise in working one's contacts and keeping tabs on the large employers and even the small employers in this case, which are likely to be hit a bit harder than normal. But I would certainly take that into account as far as possible, that we are seeing job loss in Cochise County. That will affect people's income. So far, the job loss in Cochise hasn't been as large in percentage terms as we've seen in many other parts of the state. So that's good news. But income will be supported by the CARES Act and the increase in unemployment compensation benefits through the end of July. But after that, if the jobs aren't there, then you're going to see significant income loss affecting behavior in the county.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, here we ran some numbers, and our lowest property tax collection rate was in 2011 or 12, and it went down to like 93, 94%. But up last year, we were about to hit 98%, and this year we went conservative and budgeted 95% collection rate of our levy.
Yeah, I would watch the job growth and how those impacts spread across sectors, and kind of think about that for the state as a whole. As I mentioned, I'm kind of thinking that certainly the job decline will be similar to what we saw in the 2008-2009 downturn, but you got to keep in mind that what's, at least under current assumptions, what's expected for the state is much shorter shock, right? So you get these giant job losses that happen just in a couple of months, and then as we reopen, employment starts to grow again. So if we look at fiscal year, you do get some impact in FY20, but most of it winds up in FY21. But even so, that includes a significant chunk of the recovery as well. So it'll really depend on how things play out specifically within Cochise County. How bad do the job losses get and the income losses, and then what's the recovery like? So you'll be watching that along with everybody else, including me.
Well, thank you. One more. As a U of A alumni myself, we've been reading, and I saw an email from the president last month where we're concerned about, in-state and out-of-state, and then even foreign enrollments for the fall. And there's been talk of furloughs and pay cuts. As one of the largest employers in Tucson, how's the U of A looking?
Well, the U of A is looking at a pretty severe shock to its finances and enrollments. We're going to be learning about all this with everybody else as it transpires. As with everything, there's a huge amount of uncertainty, and a lot depends on how the outbreak progresses around the country and here locally. We are going to see enrollments at least in-person enrollments are going to be down pretty significantly just because of the the foreign students. The incoming foreign students can't get visas. So that's gonna be a significant shock to the U of A. The big question, or at least one of the questions, is what will happen to domestic enrollments, and if that does affect, if the outbreak does affect the desire of students to even cross state lines to go to school. There's two offsetting effects that'll make it harder for us to attract students from other states, or maybe from states that are farther away. But there'll be opportunities to retain more in-state students and to draw students from places that are maybe suffering more from the outbreak, maybe from states that are closer by. So not really sure how this is going to work out for the domestic students, but certainly for the internationals, there's going to be a big shock, and that's going to affect the university's finances, as the university administration has noted many times. I think we seem on track to see lower levels of employment at the university, and for those who are employed, the wage structure is likely to be shifted down over the next fiscal year, and that'll have impacts on the broader community, because the U of A is one of the larger employers. But the thing to keep in mind as well is that the U of A is a premier global academic institution, and this won't change that. It'll be a matter of the university finding a way to get from these current problems to a sustainable long-run equilibrium where our hard-won competitive advantages will really rule the day.
Well, what a great way to describe the U of A there, and to finish it up. I do appreciate it. I don't have any questions from our chat box, but I think I got my questions answered, so I thank you for that. And we really appreciate you dialing in and being a partner with Cochise County here. And just want to say thank you, and then I'm going to turn it over to a short talk I'm going to do about some fund structures and government expenses and revenues. So thank you, Dr. Hammond. We appreciate it.
Oh, great. Thank you, Dan. Take care. Have a great day. Stay safe.
All right. Thank you. All right. I'm going to keep going here. What do we got today? Local government fund structures, expenses, and revenues. So I got my PowerPoint up. It's a good opportunity. Last week we talked about how the government structure here locally was structured as far as the organization, with our councils or boards and your mayor, manager, council, or your mayor council form and manager council form. But what about fiscally? So fiscally, what we have is different fund types. There we go. So the different fund types we have here in local government: general fund, special revenue funds, enterprise funds, internal service funds, debt service, capital, fiduciary, agency, and permanent funds. So this is a good shot of Cochise County and how our total budget is structured. The general fund there is at about 85 million for this upcoming year. Special revenues are 56, internal service 20 million, enterprise 10.5, and capital 15.9. So what are these different types of funds? So your general fund is the big one. It's the fund. That's where all your major taxes go and your major expenses come out for core services. It's really the big fund, it's the big glass we're all drinking from. We share the general fund. Your special revenue funds. This is where you get funds or revenues for very specific purposes, and they can only be spent on that specific purpose. So with that, we create a separate fund. So this could be, for example, our HERF, our highway funds, are in a separate fund. A lot of our health district have special funds for grants from the state health department for child care counseling, your breastfeeding education, and even your federal WIC program. all of those funds are sequestered in their own separate funds, so the money coming in can only be spent on that specific purpose. And also our special districts, such as your library district and your flood control district. They all go to that specific fund, and it can only be spent on that specific purposes. And these are obviously frequently audited, and this is where an organization could get in trouble if you're spending funds from money in one fund for a specific purpose, and then you're not spending it for that specific purpose. And that's, or if you don't spend all of it, they could, the grantor could ask for some of that back. Enterprise funds. Enterprise funds are funds that we have for business-like entities in the government. So this would be utilities or something that's run like a business. So for example, here in Cochise County, we have the airport where we sell fuel on the tarmac. So there's an airport enterprise fund for providing that service to the public that we charge for, they pay for, and then that money stays in the airport fund. Another example is, like locally we have, wastewater utilities or water utilities in certain places where the consumer or the resident pays for a service, and then that money stays in that fund to provide that service. Next, internal service funds. So these are kind of like enterprise funds, but they're internally. So they're internal businesses that the county runs here to provide services to other departments. So the biggest example is fleet. We have a heavy and light fleet department in their own funds, and every department, whether it's the general fund or a grant in the health department, pays to use vehicles from fleet. So they pay fleet and money. They pay fleet those funds, and fleet provides the vehicles. So it's an internal service. And what I always like to say is that we need to, when we think about the size of our funds here, so that internal service, that $20 million is actually coming from special revenue and general fund. So when we look at the whole county budget, we need to realize some of that, it's not all cash money from places. Some of it is things that we pay for from other departments. So it's something I really want to point out within our internal service funds. And the other one we have here at the county is our Cochise Combined Trust, which is health insurance. So your general fund and special revenue funds that have employees, they, instead of paying a private company for health insurance, we pay our health trust per employee based on the plan, and that money goes into the internal service fund that then is part of a trust to pay for health insurance. Next, we have fiduciary funds. So the county doesn't have any fiduciary funds, but that's it's like holding for another party where you have fiduciary responsibility. So for these, think of your retirement systems like ASRS or PSPRS or state retirement systems. Those are fiduciary funds where they take our monthly contributions from our paychecks and hold them, and are fiduciary responsible for providing that retirement system. Another fund is agency fund, and this is held for another government. So the biggest example is the Arizona Department of Revenue collects our sales tax from businesses and consumers, and then that's an agency fund, and then it distributes it down to the counties. And a permanent fund. Again, we don't have any of these in the county, but this is a fund where you can't spend the actual money. You can only spend the interest you generate on it. So the best example here in Arizona is we have a state land trust where the state owns this land and they may sell it or generate interest off it, but that money goes towards education. So it's an agency fund, or I'm sorry, it's a permanent fund. Another example I believe they have in Alaska, where they have, from oil and natural resources, they have this permanent fund that they've generated revenue from their natural resources, and it can, only the interest can be dispersed down to the citizens. So those are your fund types. And if you look at the Cochise County budget, which we're going into the tentative next Tuesday, documents are online. You'll see how we have special revenue funds, internal service funds, enterprise funds, and capital funds, and our general fund. You can see the size of all these. What about expenses? So what do we pay for and how do we project it? So on the expense type, and here's a good shot of the upcoming Cochise County general fund budget. Biggest chunk you'd see is personnel, and this is in millions. So personnel, salaries, benefits, overtime, health insurance, retirement, worker comp, that all goes into personnel. And so we're looking at about 44.3 million for our general fund for about 600 employees. Other things, supplies, office supplies, books, computers, drugs, medicines, repair and maintenance, contractual services. That's outside contractors and inside contractors, like money going to fleet and our internal service funds for those services, auditing, bank charges, that type of thing. Contractual services, support and care of persons, meals, clothing, for example, in the jail, medical services at the health department, like x-rays, and or even your access contribution, which is the Arizona Healthcare Containment System. Judicial expenditures, interpreters, contract attorneys, jury fees, arbitration, mental health evaluations and treatment. Other, that's some other expenses, for example, a per parcel fee where special district would be charged for the use of the county assessor and treasurer and finance for evaluating your property, assessing it, and then charging the sales tax, that type of thing. And transfers out, we do have some transfers out of the general fund where your general tax money comes in, but that's usually for like a grant match where we receive a grant on the condition that we pay 10% of the grant. So how do we project all these expenses? Well, on our personnel side, this year we completed what I call an FTE inventory. So we had all the departments and offices come together and say, how many people and positions do we actually have? And we looked at every single position across the board, the compensation, what the market compensation is, and all the employee related expenses as far as percentages for health insurance, retirement, workers' comp. And we really did a comprehensive look at what our personnel budget is. So that's how we come up with a personnel budget. For your operations, which is your supplies, contractual services, that type of things, the departments submit that because they know best. So they say, this is what it costs to run my department. And then when we look at personnel, we have to take those EREs, those employee-related expenses, from multiple sources. So, I have to get our annual reports from all our retirement plans, ASRS, PSPRS, CORP, which is your corrections officers retirement plan, your elected officials retirement plans. All these are separate entities that set their own rates. And we even look at the federal government for your payroll taxes, which is your FICA. So we come up with these bits of information from different places to put together the budget. Internally, we look at our caseloads. So when departments tell us how much their operations are going to cost, we also look at, for example, permits in our development department. They may be tracking this year over year and say this is going to be a busy year or a slow year. Or with the elections going up, we know we've got a big election in 2020, so we know that's going to be increased costs. Or our health department tracks visitors, especially right now they're doing an extreme amount of contact tracing. So let's say, well, we're going to have increased contact tracing expenses. Or the sheriff's office may have statistics on crime. So we look at our local caseloads to determine where we need to budget and how much. And we also have a lot of stakeholders that we work with, like the state and the County Supervisors Association. They let us know what's in the state budget that's going to affect our budget. Or our insurer, the Arizona County Insurance Pool. We have to wait for them to tell us how much this expense is going to cost. And then we also take our direction from the Board of Supervisors, and they say, okay, well, this is part of our strategic plan, so I need this funded. And what are our priorities for this year? So we take all this information and aggregate it and put together the best budget we can get. There's one other thing I want to mention here, and I'm going to bring it up. It is not in the PowerPoint, but it's some very good information. We always talk about the expenditure limit. So what is that? Per state statute, and I'm going to put this on the screen, so it should be coming through. Per state statute and the Arizona Constitution, a county is only allowed to spend so much money, and it's based on a formula. So they look at our growth in population based on a baseline set in 1978. Then they look at this, what's called the GDP implicit price deflator. What that is, it's a measure of inflation that it's a little esoteric and it takes into account our actual national GDP. But just know that this is inflation. And then the base limit, or baseline limit from 1970. So basically what you have is my change in population times my change in inflation times my base limit from 1979 equals what I'm allowed to spend. So the whole county can only spend that much money based on this statutory formula. And it's done for every county. So we can see, here we are with Cochise. So we can see our population has increased from 1978 to 2019. So our population factor is 1.69. And the inflation from 1978 is 3.1398. And our base limit spending back then was only 13 million. So the law says as a county, we can only spend $70.9 million. That's it. So that's a primer on the expenses and the cap. And it's designed to keep the government from growing too large or spending too much money. So I wanted to share that with you guys. Okay. So back to our expenses here. So that's how we put our expenses together. What about the revenue side? There's only a few categories of government revenue. Big one, taxes, sales tax, state, county, property tax, penalties, interest on that property tax. And we're going to get more into taxation next week on the theory of taxation. So I'm not going to get too much into this, but the biggest category is taxes. Other categories, fees. So a fee for an animal license or a liquor license. Fines. And the criminal justice system, the justice of the peace court or the superior court, you get charged a fine. Charges for service. This is a charge to use a government service in some cases. You know, their development services department might charge for a building permit or a building inspection, or the health department might charge for a certain service they provide. Or we have intergovernmental agreements with other cities and where we share a service and they pay for it. And we'll get into that next week. We'll talk to the assistant city manager from Sierra Vista about some of our cooperative agreements and how we charge for that. And the last way to generate revenue is borrowing. It doesn't mean we're borrowing money to pay our recurring bills, but when we borrow money for a capital project, that is a revenue that is coming into the county that we then spend. So it's a quick snapshot of where governments generate revenues. So how do we project these revenues? We talked about our expenses and all the little pieces we put together to figure out how much our operations are going to cost. So when we look at our revenues, we have to look at, again, all the levels of government and how they work together. So when we project, you know, we always try to be project not low, but the last thing we want to do is project high and then have to make cuts as the year goes on. That's really a difficult thing we're going through right now, where the key takeaway I had from Dr. Hammond was there's a lot of uncertainty. So we're being very conservative, and we'll get into what we budgeted here shortly. Okay, so our national factors. Well, we look at our GDP. How's population changed? What about inflation or unemployment? And with unemployment, the other part of that is your workforce participation. Dr. Hammond mentioned that as well. What about personal income? How's that change? Or even the stock market? So we look at these factors nationally and see how they've changed. Then we can see how they've changed in Arizona or Cochise County compared to the national. And the state, what about population trends? You know, in the last 10 years or 15 years even, Arizona was one of the fastest growing states in the country. Is that going to change? Is the pandemic going to stop people from moving across states in general? We don't know. And is that state growth matched to our local growth? And I'll hit that when we get to local. So like I asked Dr. Hammond, what's going on with the universities or University of Arizona there in Tucson? That's going to affect us. Or major industries at the state level. With a couple of years ago, they shut down the Navajo generating station up in Page, Arizona. Well, that had a huge impact on the whole region. What about changes in state law? We had the Wayfair online sales tax. So now we're getting some sales tax from all those Amazon purchases. Well, that's going to affect us, so we need to pay attention to that as well. So local. Again, we need to understand that there's a tie between the state growth and the local growth. And I know we always joke about the great state of Maricopa, but at the state level, Tucson and Phoenix are the economic drivers of the state. And as much as we may not like the sound of it, our transaction privilege tax, the state sales tax, is a redistribution. It is redistributed based on population, not where it's generated. So in a couple slides, we'll get into the state sales tax, and you'll see how it's twice as much as our local sales tax and is based on Phoenix and Tucson. So it's really important to understand the tie between our state and local economies. So local, again, we look at our caseloads. Maybe we'll look at what's going on with the Cochise Community College or Fort Huachuca. We're always watching that. Population, because while Arizona was one of the fastest growing states in the country, Cochise County wasn't. So we need to understand where we are in the bigger picture. And we look at 5 to 10 year trends of actuals and of what we've actually collected for tax. What about some risks when projecting revenue? So there's a couple big risks. One is just technical, and that has to do if the model, your variable, or your data is wrong. This is more at a larger state level, which maybe Dr. Hammond is working with, statistical analysis software and large data sets from other universities trying to project what's going to happen in Phoenix or Tucson as a whole. Well, they're building economic and statistical and analytical models. Well, the model's only as good as the model. The model could not be correct. So there's always a modeling problem, or there could be a modeling risk. Another risk we have is just our economic cycle. The economy goes in peaks and troughs. We know that. So it's always a risk, is we never know when the next one's going to happen. Obviously, we're in one right now, and we're trying to figure out how bad it's going to get. And the last one is what I got, my professor in college called the wild card risk. He goes, hey, it could be a natural disaster, a war, or a pandemic. I never thought I'd be seeing it 5 years after college, but yeah, this is totally unprecedented and unpredictable. So now we're all adapting our models, our variables, the data we're looking at, and trying to figure out what this does to the economic cycle. So it's a huge risk that we've currently encountered in projecting revenues. We've never seen anything like this. So let's look at some general fund revenues that we have here in Cochise County. So this is Cochise County General Fund. And this is what we budgeted last year, and I'll get the numbers out for what we're budgeting for the next year. It's already online if you look at the budget documents posted for next Tuesday. So almost half of our revenue is property tax, and I'll get more into this next week when we really hit theory of taxation and stuff like that. Property tax is pretty stable, at least year over year for this year. There is a worry that we have a lower collection rate, but we'll just watch that as the year goes on. So property tax, 47%. The biggest thing that has everybody worried is our sales tax. It's 37% of our budget right here, and that is extremely volatile and based solely on consumer activity. So when we look at the numbers of our specific sales tax, I want to point out, the HERF, which is your Highway User Revenue Fund, that 9.6 million and 1.9 million all go to the HERF. That's a special revenue fund. Then these up here are our general fund taxes, which are not restricted. HERF is restricted for highways, as it should be. So this portion is our sales tax right here. And then I'm getting used to my little marker here, so I know it looks a little sloppy, but bear with me. So this is our unrestricted sales tax that goes into the general fund and makes up that 37%. What I want to point out is that state shared 13.2 million is your state tax that's redistributed. That's almost twice as much as your county half cent. So we need to understand the larger picture here, that twice as much of our sales tax coming in comes from the state and potentially Phoenix and Tucson based on their redistribution formula. So let's keep that in mind here, that we're not the economic powerhouse or the growth hub of Arizona. We're a beneficiary of that. So it's just really important for us to understand where we are. Okay, general fund revenues. What we got next? We'll talk a little bit about HERF revenues. Again, what the biggest worry about HERF is, all of HERF, 94%, is consumer based. So that's scary, where we don't have that stable base of property tax like the general fund. HERF is almost all consumer based. The only good thing we have as far that insulates us from that is it is a per gallon tax, is what we call an excise tax. So other taxes, it's a half cent or a 0.5%. The county sales tax is a 0.5% of the cost of a product. But the other type of taxes is called excise tax, and it's per unit. So we know gas prices go up and down. So to insulate us from that up and down fluctuation in cost affecting or causing an up and down fluctuation in revenues, we have the taxes per unit, so it's per gallon. So we're slightly insulated from the fluctuations in gas price, but it's still susceptible to market volatilities in gas usage. So HERF could be affected very greatly by the Corona thing if we take out our travel and gas usage for tourism and leisure. So that could be greatly affected. All right, now let's look at some real revenues. So here's my favorite meme here. We're all pretty worried about the coronavirus here, and I hope we can recover from it. All right, let's keep going. So these are actual things that we're seeing here. So county sales tax, how do we track this? Well, as the year goes by, we start in July at 0 here, and we see where we are. So the green is 1920 where we're at right now, and we're in May. June hasn't hit yet. 1920 has just been an absolute powerhouse of a year, and you can see as of May, we are already over the prior year, which is great. So we're doing good. This extra tax revenue, the economic growth we've seen, is going to help carry us through the downturn that we're coming into. So as the year goes on, I use this type of graph to track how we're stacking up against the previous years. And I do want to note, we only budgeted for county sales tax $6.9 million right here. So in April, we hit our budgeted amount. So all this is just icing on the cake. So we're doing good when I look at county sales tax right now. But what I've been telling everybody is we have to wait, because this data is timed to when it was dispersed to us. So there's a 2-month lag. So when I say May was great, well, that May number is from 2 months ago. So, and we know we had the lockdown or the stay-at-home order, excuse me, April. We won't know what April looks like until June when it hits our pockets here at the county. That's why we've been budgeting conservatively for the next year, and we won't even know until months later. And how bad is May? We won't know until July. So another way I track county sales tax is looking at our monthly disbursements. So this isn't a total or an aggregate. you can see we're always hovering around $600,000 in sales tax revenue a month. Again, 1920, the green line, just an absolute powerhouse of a year for sales tax. I mean, we are just hundreds of thousands of dollars above the prior years. The other thing, the takeaway, is our seasonal trends. Oh, there's the bump, there's another one. And then I have to do my math. Why is February so huge? Well, it's probably because of Christmas. Why is May so huge? Well, that's probably our shoulder tourist season. So the monthly analysis helps us look at our seasonal trends. And what happens if we have a really bad Christmas? Well, if all of a sudden my February is really low, whoa, what? That's a big deal. So it really helps us understand the aggregate and then the monthly. All right, let's keep going. State sales tax. Again, what I wanted to point out was this is almost twice as much as what our county sales tax was budgeted at. Again, this is delayed 2 months. So here we are in May. We haven't received our June, but that May dispersal is from March. So who knows how bad our April stay-at-home order is? Well, we got to wait until June. But another great thing, we budgeted about 13.9 million, I think. So as of May, we have hit our budgeted amount. So anything we get in June is just icing on the cake above budget. So we're doing good right now, but we just don't know what's April going to bring when we get it in June. Okay, so to keep talking about state sales tax. Let's go back one. County sales tax, I see our seasonal effects, but the state, they don't play that game. The state is very hard to analyze because what it comes through the state. So let's say there's an expense or an error, they'll take it back or put it in the next month, or maybe they'll do 2 disbursements in a month or 1 extra disbursement from the previous month. So the state, it's more difficult to decipher. Like when I look at July of last year, why is there that big discrepancy? I don't know. It could have been just the timing of the payment. We do see, we still have our February peaks here, here, here. So we do see the seasonality. It's just harder to dissect the state revenue for the same level of analysis. But, you know, for the most part, we're above the previous years on a monthly basis. So there are 2 lenses I look at our incoming sales tax with. HERF, this is another chart I use. It's the same information, but it's a bar graph. So this is monthly for HERF, and this, everything is on a cycle. So I want us to look at 2019 in the green, right? It's up, it's up, it's flat, it's up, it's up, it's up, that's flat, it's up, it's up, it's up, a little low. So what HERF has just been a powerhouse too. People are buying gas and going places. But May was down and June was down. June, this is the biggest decrease we can see here. May was a decrease. Well, why? Because May and June were from March and April. So these are the pieces of information we have to figure out how bad the economic repercussions are from our stay-at-home orders. Another lens, vehicle license tax. So vehicle license tax, when you buy a vehicle, you pay sales tax on it. That goes to sales tax. But you also have to pay your annual vehicle license tax. So we're also looking at, you know, purchase of used vehicles versus new vehicles to see what the economy is going to tell us about that. And what do we have here? May, if you can see, this is a brighter red, but May was a low month. And then, let me correct myself. There's 2 disbursements each month. So notice that. So this first May disbursement was super low. Why? Because, well, it was probably March. But the second May and the first June were huge. So we don't know what's going on with vehicle license tax and new vehicle purchases, but we're going to get some data on that and pay attention and go, okay, maybe this trend right here after 6 weeks is telling us that, yeah, there was a one-time dip in vehicle purchases, but we're over it and we're going to start buying vehicles again. So we don't know. This is the type of stuff we do here. There's one other tax I want to talk about in the charts that I need to bring up on a second document, so bear with me. And it's the property tax. So we've all been talking about sales tax, but let's talk property tax. So this is the document we use to track here internally. So this is our county property tax by month. So the biggest takeaway here is July, August, September. There's almost no property tax collected. October, November, we collect property tax. December, January, February, March, almost none. Then April and May, we collect property tax again. June, almost none. It's that cyclical element of tax collection for when we get our property tax bills. So what you're seeing is the vast majority of property tax bills are paid, in escrow or by the property owner when they're billed. So we have some seasonality with that, but what does that mean where we collect it? So this is how the money adds up in the bank. So July, August, September, there's no money coming in from property tax. Then in October, November, December, we hit 15 million. Then January, March, nothing. And then we finally hit our 25 million mark here by April, May, and June, there's nothing. So there's some seasonality to property tax collections. And that's why I'm always recommending we need to keep that cash on hand, because we don't get sales, or we don't get property tax regularly in the same manner that we get sales tax. So that's our vehicle tax and sales tax. All right, I'm going to end it here. We talked a lot about the type of revenues and expenses we see here in a local government and how we project them. So right now, if there's any questions, send them in the chat box, and I will. I'll hang out for a little bit and wait for some questions. But that's all I have. So I appreciate you guys chiming in and listening to Dr. Hammond, who's just a great economist up there. And I was really happy he could talk to me, and I'll be here waiting for some questions. And that's all I have. Thanks. Oh, a couple of quick announcements. We did get all the slides and recordings up. So let me show you where we got that here. So just county website, and we've got the webinar link up here. You can select the day. And this is where you're joined. So we've got our full schedule here. That link for presentations attachments. So we've got all the slides and our guest slides and the budget videos from the first 2 weeks, and we'll get the third up there today. So finally getting caught up with that. So thank you for bearing with me. All right, and I'll hang out for a few with questions. Thank you. Oh, I've got a question about the increase in VLT and the transition to electric vehicles in Phoenix and Tucson. So I'm not familiar that there was a potential increase in the vehicle license tax, but what the issue is with the transition from electric to electric vehicles is that when we buy that gallon of gas, as we talked about, the HERF tax is an excise tax, so it's per unit, and we do that to insulate us from the volatility of the price of gasoline. So we charge per gallon. But over the last couple of decades, vehicles have become more fuel efficient. So we're buying less gasoline in volume. So there's a downside to the excise tax. But I don't know about an increase in VLT, but I've heard it floated around that, well, because electric vehicles aren't paying this HERF gas tax, they're putting wear and tear on the roads, but they're not contributing to the fund that helps repair the roads. So I could definitely see us going to increased vehicle license tax for electric vehicles. I'm not up on it, so let me put that on my list of things to research and take back. But just another thought on that, you know, we've been doing online sales tax, and that's been hurting online retailers. And it took us, what, 10 or 15 years to change the law to get the Wayfarer sales tax. So if we're going to change VLT to adopt for electric vehicles, it's going to be a while. I wouldn't accuse anybody of responding swiftly to that. Well, there's a few more people still on here. Let me bring up the website for 2 minutes and see if our budget documents are posted online. So you can get a snapshot of what the budget's going to look like. It's got our homepage, department, Board of Supervisors, agendas and minutes. And the board is we got a special session. I think that's what it is. Oh, let's try that one. Oh, work session, is that it? No, wow, this should be more user friendly. Now I feel bad. It's not posted. I think there's a time frame or rule for a certain amount of days, so it just might not be posted yet for next Tuesday. But what you will see is what we're going to have for the budget is, let me bring it up here. We'll have a big budget book that should be online here shortly. This is still a letter going over the basics of what will be in the budget. and any major changes in revenues, expenses, and then a breakdown of the different funds we talked about. So got our 2021 general fund and special revenue, capital, and enterprise funds. So you'll see how that's changed year over year. And then we break it down by department in the general fund, then by all special revenue funds. So when we talk about our special revenue funds, there's just a ton. There's, I want to say 100 of them. Then our capital improvement funds, and our enterprise funds. And our big enterprise funds is airport and solid waste. So you can see those. And then we've got it, every department here has a one-pager. So as soon as it's posted on the website, definitely go check it out. Every department you can see, oh, what happened from last year to this year, how many employees they have, and their general mission. So that's every single department. And then at the end, we have the funding request. You can see that even in the face of a global pandemic and recession, our departments still needed $1.8 million more. But none of those were really funded. And there's a couple other documents I'll show you guys. So if anybody wants to get into the minutia, we're also posting the actual line item budget. By the first one is the general fund by department. So you can see general fund, department board of supervisors, wages, telephone, postage, insurance, county promotion. So you can see all that for every single department. There's treasurer by line item, assessor by line item, recorder by line item, justice court 6 by line item, adult probation by line item, legal defender by line item. So those are all there. And that's one way to look at it. And the other way is by funds. So these are all of our funds organized by fund. So this is general fund, and I can see that the general fund as a whole, okay, how much liquor license, how much auto tax, get to my expenses, okay, general fund, elected official wages, 1.7 million. All wages, 26.9. So this is by fund, but we do this so you can see what the general fund spends primarily everything on, and then all your special revenue funds. So for example, we have a public defender training fund, $3,000 grant. What else we got? Fleet management as a separate fund is 4.8. Attorney victim compensation, $81,000 state grant. These are all our grants, our special revenue funds. Let's see what else we got here. Adult probation state aid enhancement, almost $1 million grant there. So these are all our funds. This is a large document. You can see almost 200 pages. Governor Office of Highway Safety Fund, $12,000 grant, and that goes to overtime and employee-related expenses. So this level of detail will be obviously available to the public and posted on the website. I apologize it's not up there now, but it will be, and it will be posted with the tentative budget work session for next Tuesday, and then it's still going to be posted for the next almost 30 days until we go to the final adopted budget. So apologize it's not up there now, but it's absolutely available to the public. And one other thing I'll show you guys is the state budget schedules. And these are called the official budget county budget forms that are mandated by the state auditor general. So the state mandates all budgets be presented in this manner, and it's extremely esoteric and takes me hours to do, and it's for an auditing purpose, and that's pretty much it. So the auditor general can look at every county budget in the same format, because some of us have different financial systems that spit out those reports differently. So if you want to go through these to put yourself to sleep, but no, it's out there, and there is some good stuff in here. You know, it compares tax rates from year over year, property taxes from year over year, revenues other than property taxes, and all our special revenue funds again. So it's just a lot of the same information, but differently. What else we got here? And then at the end, it has all our employee information. So general fund, 600, that's low. General fund, 603 employees, that much on salary, that much on retirement, that much total. And then it shows every single special revenue fund and how much employees they fund. Here we go, Sheriff's Office Financial Crimes. There's 1.5 employees there. In the Public Health Emergency Prep Grant, there's 1.5 employees. So and then you can see we have 888 total employees in the county. And here we've got, again, our enterprise funds, internal service funds. Like I said, we don't have permanent funds and we don't have debt funds. We have capital project funds. So, I wanted you guys to know that's all out there as well. All right, let's see, one more question. Oh, I got something about grant funds. So let me pick a grant here. Grant funds most grants are reimbursed. So when you pay a grant, or I'm sorry, when a grant says you've received a grant for the Women, Infant, Children federal program, which is a nutrition program. What happens is, I don't remember where that is, but what's going to happen is the grantor will say, okay, you've been approved for a grant for $500,000, 2 employees with benefits and operating costs and office space and utilities. The whole package of the whole grant pays for the whole operation. And then what happens is they go, okay, your grant starts July 1st. The grant starts, the employee starts, we start paying the employee, we pay utilities on that building if it's a separate facility, we pay operating, we pay for printer paper, we pay for the whole thing. And then after the first 30 days, we run our financial report and say, then we go to WIC, for example, the grantor, we give them and go, okay, we've spent 30 days worth of this grant, here's proof, and then they cut us a check and we get it, let's say, two weeks later. So what happens is we spend 30 days, we report, and then in another 30 days we get the reimbursement. But what happens is that somebody has to pay that money. So the county pays for the first 30 days, requests reimbursement, we get reimbursement. So at day 60, after 2 months, we've received reimbursement for the first month. But the problem is we've already paid the second month. So then come month 3, where we've paid 3 months but reimbursed for 2. Then at month 6, we've paid 6 months up front and been reimbursed for 5. So there's always a lag based on how long it takes to get reimbursed. So what happens is the county is perpetually in the red for however long it takes to get reimbursed. So if you have a grant for 1 year and it reimburses you every month, the county pays that grant up front, and then we are continually in the red for 1 month because we're always paying 1 month and getting reimbursed 1 month behind. So it's, yes, grants are good, but we need to keep in mind that nothing's free. Nobody rides for free. That we're fronting the money for every single reimbursable grant. And if it's a good program, it provides a good service to the citizens, yes, we understand that. But when I love my health department, when their budget is $5 million and $2 million of that is grants, that almost means that we need to front a portion of that. And then if I throw in every department that's on a grant, and let me go back here. Okay, special revenue, most of those are grants. So not all of them are reimbursement, but that's a big chunk of money that the county is paying up front and getting reimbursed on. So the county in their reserves and general fund needs to have that cash money to pay the bill. We still have to keep the lights on. So it was a good question about grants. Yeah, they're good, but nobody rides for free. All right, gosh, that's an hour and 45 minutes. I feel like I should cut you guys loose here. So good questions, and I appreciate it. And we'll see you next week. And we got all the videos and slides up, so we're really going. So thank you, guys.